On learning, we've talked about the importance of direct observation of your users and recording that in field notes. How do you actually get those field notes? Well, if we go to storytelling here, the introduction describes why this is important and how to do it, and this section here, what did we ask them, has a list of sample interview questions that Enable Quiz use. Now these are not the exact questions you use, and it's not a good idea to stick to always a specific script when you're out talking to customers. It is a good place to have a few questions to keep things moving. These sample questions for Enable Quiz are organized around some key objectives, which you should definitely think about. First, understanding the buyer, understanding them like your best friend. This is where you get that vivid description of the personas, and you really get your intuitive sense of who these people are. You want to understand their operating environment, their learning environment, meaning how do they find out about new ideas? How would they find out about your product? You want to understand how they perceive the need or problem that you're addressing. What do they think about it? Is it important? Do they care about it? How do they describe it? What words do they use to describe it? You want to understand how the buyer is solving the problem today to the degree that they are, and how they'd like to solve that problem. You always want to have a few casting a line questions. Hey, is there anything else you think would be interesting to talk about? Anything else you'd like to tell me? And then don't forget about housekeeping. If you think you might want to go back and show them a prototype that you don't now have, ask them about that and make a note so that you know whether it's okay to go ask them for another visit or not. Next, there is some quantitative work you can do online. Enable Quiz, for example, went out and looked at a few key search terms to see how they were trending. And what they learned in their case was the idea of a technical quiz. They saw some signals on Google Trends, which is probably the best tool publicly available to go look for this stuff. And then they also looked at what technical skill sets were most interesting and which ones were trending, so they could figure out which focal propositions they wanted to try out under this idea of technical quizzing. So if we go to Google Trends, for example, which is just google.com/trends, if we search for Windows admin, we see declining, probably because people are searching for more specific things, but relatively consistent demand for that search term. This scale from 0 to 100 is a relative scale, meaning that 100 is the most searches that ever happened, and then everything's scaled against that. This does not tell you the absolute amount of searches that were done, although there's a few signals you can look at to try and get a sense of the magnitude. If we go back and look at a more modern framework like Node, what we'll see is that this search term is relatively new, just coming about really in late 2009, early 2010, and it's just trending upwards in relative terms. So I'd look at this ability to go search Google Trends, which is a great ability, as more of a tool to validate whether or not the specific terms you think your customer is thinking in are trending or not. It's not a great way, just because it is relatively one-dimensional, to get inside your buyer's head, your customer's head. Next, we have design, and this is where I'm putting this whole rubric of distilling, synthesizing what you've learned from your field research. So that's your personas, your problem scenarios, your stories, your assumptions. And if we go here on Enable Quiz, we can see the personas here. We've got photos, videos would be even better. There are vivid descriptions of our target personas that we want to sell to, have interact with the product. And next we have notes on the problem scenarios that Enable Quiz found. Problem scenarios are important because when you write user stories, you want to make sure you're hitting something relevant. Problem scenario is a good way to focus and motivate your user stories. Enable Quiz also created some summary information about what they think the hiring process looks like before and after. And then we come to the user stories. And there are examples here that you can take, and once you download the template, you can update this with your own findings and your own ideas. Lastly, we've got this idea of validation, figuring out if your key assumptions, what your key assumptions are, and whether they're actually correct in a provable, disprovable kind of way. There's yet another template here that actually stores all this stuff. It's a Google App Spreadsheet, and this is by the same token, you can take this and you can download it, or you can save it onto your own Google Apps domain. If you're logged into Google Apps, you have Google Apps. Here we see the key assumption, whether it needs proving, notes on the experimental design. This is a place for you to do an initial take on all your key assumptions and how you're going to prove them out. So once you've laid out your user, your problem scenarios, your stories, then things get interesting. You've also laid out your assumptions, and you're going through and you've created a way to pop through and do some experiments to validate or invalidate those key assumptions that you've made part of the business design of your startup. And at this point, you're always looking for the fastest, quickest, most meaningful results you can get first, and then you move down the line from there. That's what we mean by the validation phase. And lastly, you have development. I'm not going to go too much into the actual process of development here, but these items that precede and surround development, their purpose is to help you focus and orient what you actually want to develop so you're more productive when you're delivering those materials.